You can look hard to try to find something that doesn't have animal products. You're going to be hard pressed. Antiques from the turn of the last century last forever because those trees were hundreds of thousands of years old. They cut them down, they made a table, it's going to last forever. Our tables today made of the wood today isn't going to last forever. Those trees haven't stood there that long. It's the same with the soil. We used to bag up soil and it was full of nutrients and it was just dense. And that's not the case anymore. The soil doesn't even have time to basically become soil, right? It's like newborn soil and we put it in a bag and it just doesn't have any nutrients in it. I actually learned a lot from the folks growing marijuana because they use the hydroponics. Plants don't get salmonella. That is from animal products being put on plants. There are certain cancer-causing chemicals that can't be put on organic vegetables.
Hi there and welcome to Plant CEO. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome Erin Riley, the CEO and founder of Cabbage animal-free fertilizer company. Hey Erin, how's it going?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. What inspired you, first of all, to create this company and what you're expecting people to get out of this chat today?
So I began my gardening career about 15 years ago here in Los Angeles, planting vegetable gardens for clients and also communities and schools. And then to sort of save money, basically, I ordered all of my fertilizer inputs in bulk, right? Instead of like buying it per bag or per box, because I'm using hundreds of pounds at a time. I'll just get all the inputs myself and mix them. And then I realized, I can really fine tune my fertilizer blends. So like tomatoes need kind of like a late season phosphorus punch, and then lettuces really just only need nitrogen. So I was able to kind of tweak the fertilizers. So it's really in there, and I actually am hand mixing them, right? And I'm pouring them into the hands of little school children and explaining what's in the stuff. And over time, the shocked looks of like adults, I was like, people don't know what's in fertilizer. And I was not a vegan at the time. I just did what everyone else did, right? My grandmother put bone meal on her tomatoes, so I put bone meal on my tomatoes. And I didn't think too much about it. But because I was handling these individual inputs, I wanted to find out where they were sourced. And I'll tell you, the sourcing was not organic. It's regulated, but not like in a way that you and I would assume regulated means, like keeping it safe. It's more like regulated in that it passes through all these different systems and then is stamped organic when it hits the bag. And I was just like, well, that's not what I'm about. And that's not what I thought organic was about. I thought organic was like wholesome, small farms, safe. And so I decided for my own sake, I was going to make a animal-free fertilizer. And I took all these kind of plant and mineral-based inputs and started using them in my gardens. And I thought they worked great. And so I took all my gardens, plant-based. And then I thought, why my clients, even my communities, I'm really just talking to a small group of people. And if people are so shocked about what's in organic fertilizer, I should really be spreading the word more. And there was just something specific about the way I was sort of sounding the alarm that was resonating with people.
When the parents saw you putting the fertilizer in their children's hands, were they thinking, we normally don't put fertilizer on our own hands because it's got chemicals in it? Is that what they were kind of querying when they were looking at you?
No, I think when I was telling the kids that it's made of animal parts, they were just like, it's just not what you expect to hear. I would start off kind of making the kids like, you're trying to get them engaged in gardening. And I would say, guess what's in it? And they'll be like, poo, ooh, gross, manure. And then I'd be like, well, it's not really poo. It's actually animals, ground up animals. And obviously I had to, at that point, like sort of start editing myself.
Yeah.
And, we don't want to give these kids nightmares. So that was sort of the interaction I was having. And then in my workshops, I have vegan and vegetarian friends, especially here in LA, and they didn't know that their vegetables weren't vegan, any vegetable, especially in the organic ones. That's the problem, that the organic was what was really bad.
Why is organic vegetables, or I guess the way they're grown, worse than non-organic vegetables?
Right. So non-organic vegetables are grown in chemicals or synthetic materials, and they use pesticides and stuff like that. But it's mostly that it's a chemical-based operation, lab, right? They make it in the lab. Where organic was all natural, right? It's from the earth. The earth can, use it better. The earth be it soil or plants, can compute natural materials better than a chemical material. So if you like over fertilize crops with chemicals, they wash off and can contaminate things with the chemicals. The idea was that organic plants and soil can absorb organic materials better. And so when they do release them, they're, you know, the soil and the planet knows what to do with these materials. But that's not the case. You know, these materials, these animal-based byproducts, I can't be reabsorbed by the earth. And they bring in antibiotics, they bring in hormones, they bring in all kinds of like forever chemicals. You know, there's stuff in the animal bones and blood and carcasses, as well as the manure, that is just as bad, if not worse, than chemicals.
Hi there, I've got some great guests coming up in the pipeline, so do please subscribe so you don't miss out. Now back to the show.
Let's talk about each byproduct and what they're used for currently so people know what the problem is.
If you're in the agriculture industry, you're going to, of course, want to use every bit of that animal to profit. And that's how it's always been. So a lot of these things like horse and hoof meal, bone meal, blood meal, there's poultry meal, feather meal, and then there's all kinds of miscellaneous meat meals, including an organic product called tankage. Tankage is just whatever's left in the tanks. I just don't know.
Which tanks?
Yeah, which tanks?
Yeah.
The tanks they came in on, the tanks they left on, just tankage. I mean, I don't understand how to be organic. How do you regulate something called tankage?
If we're also taking one item, let's pick, I don't know, feathers. From what I know, they'll be using poultry feathers in order to get nitrogen. Is that right? Yeah. So what are the other ingredients that they're using and what can the average person do about it?
So all of these animal nutrients, basically, that's the thing. They're very nutritious. That's why we eat them. Animals aren't nutritious. They have a lot, and people say they have like a lot of plant nutrition in them. Okay. So like you said, they have the nitrogen in them, and then phosphorus and potassium, the NPK, the big three numbers that have to be guaranteed as part of having a fertilizer. So nitrogen, can come from the feather meal, certainly from blood meal, very high in nitrogen. And then bone meal brings in calcium and some phosphorus. And then potassium is usually based in, most people use a mineral because it's very easy to get potassium from a mineral. But the animal products, those meals, they really bring in a lot of different things. You know, they're not actually just one thing. You're going to find a little phosphorus and potassium in those feather meals, because those chickens are full grown animals. So they have all the nutrients, right? Because that's how they live. We all have all the nutrients. If you ate us, we'd be very nutritious too. But they're also going to have manganese and boron and sulfur and iron. So it's not just the macronutrients, the NPK, there's micronutrients, and there's dozens of them. And that's what's good about organics is, as opposed to synthetics where they just make an NPK, right? That's why there's such large numbers on those bags. It can be 13, 13, 13, 20, 20, 20, because there's no micronutrients in there. It's only that NPK. Where if you get an organic fertilizer, the good thing is you're getting the whole vast realm of nutrients. That's what's good about it. So what we're able to do with plants is bring all those nutrients through as well. So I use like anything from soy to neem seed as the nitrogen. And then I use rock phosphorus for the phosphorus, and that's again a mineral. And then I use, like everyone else, sulfate potash for the potassium, because the potassium is pretty easy to come by organically. But the nitrogen is a real struggle, as is the phosphorus. Making my fertilizer, I have to use what's available right now, right? So basically, I'm making a plant-based fertilizer in a meat-based world. So I have to use the products that are, one, available, that have just been engineered and invented, and two, that are deemed organic by certifiers. I can't just make up my own thing. If I wanted to say I'm going to have a bag of comfrey, which is a wonderful perennial plant that has tons of nutrients in it that grows very easily, the certifiers are going to say no, because comfrey is not an approved food fertilizer. So right now, at least I can make this fertilizer, with what's available. But there's a whole possibility where we could make all kinds of new plant fertilizers, if we put money into that research and development.
Yeah. So do you want to take us through your product range?
Yes. So I didn't just want to make a vegan fertilizer. There are meat-based companies fertilizer companies that make vegan versions. And that's how I got my start, was in their vegan versions of their regular fertilizer. But I wanted an entire range of fertilizers that were all vegan. So there's no compromise, right? So we have an all-purpose. So that's basically the one that's the highest in nitrogen. And then, so that can be for anything. And then I have veggie, which is of course my favorite. And this is the highest in the phosphorus. Plants that fruit and flower need phosphorus. That's what helps the budding and the blooming. And of course, vegetables are all about the fruits, right? And then I have acid, because blueberries are one of my favorite things to grow. And there's certain things that need an acid fertilizer, azaleas, hydrangeas, certain flowers, and a citrus even can use a little acid. So I wanted to make sure to have an acid version. And then we just came out with a houseplant version because people are just so crazy about houseplants. And so we have a houseplant version as well. And so these are our dry granulated. So this is what you put in the soil, like when you're first planting, or maybe you're amending the soil a little bit. And then I have a concentrate. So this is something you can add to water and it makes a liquid fertilizer. So easy to fertilize your plants while you're watering them. It's just so easy to do. So this is soluble. And this is interesting because when I was researching how to make a vegan fertilizer, I actually learned a lot from the folks growing marijuana, because they use the hydroponics, right? So the water flows through all those pipes and there's all these filters throughout the system. Of course, they don't want anything getting in there and clogging their system. So it's these very expensive special filters all through the system. Well, no matter how much you ground up meat or an animal, it won't fit through that filter. It just won't go through. So they pioneered plant-based and mineral-based fertilizers that can get through the filter. And I was like, oh, thank you very much for that information. So their lens wasn't vegan or animal liberation or anything like that, or even really sustainability. They're just trying to protect their system. But I was able to use the research they did and apply it in a new area. So a lot of these soluble fertilizers are only available because they were used in the hydroponic industry.
Yeah. How did you get access to one of their farms, I guess?
Well, luckily people blog, people love sharing information. So I just followed all these people that, have their own hydroponic systems, and, people sell this stuff. Cannabis has to be the world. It has to almost be rivaling food at this point for fertilizer consumption. So there's tons of products to feed that industry. So I just got their products and kind of took them apart.
Yeah. So take me back to your own vegan journey, I guess.
After I took my gardens plant-based, I was sort of dragging my feet, and I had done enough research to know what I knew. But as I wanted to then bring this message more to the masses, I began to do more research. And anyone who loves doing research, you just get on the computer and, hours go by, you're in this crazy wormhole. And when I found out what rendering was, that was the final straw for me in terms of consuming meat myself. The rendering, it was about the animals. The animal suffering is just, I just couldn't abide by it. I have a big justice person, even though true justice doesn't exist, but it's just how my heart burns. I just burn for justice, social justice, food justice. Well, my goodness, you can't not extend that to animals. Doesn't even make sense. So that was it for me. I could not go back. And rendering is just a terrible, brutal process. It's what happens after slaughterhouses. It's how they make fertilizer and cosmetics and fuel. That practice is so barbaric. And I get it. It's like a necessary for the industry, but to me, it turned me forever.
Yeah. And that was after you learned about it, I guess. Obviously, you had the insights in terms of the products that you were buying. Can we speak about soil? Is that something that you'll see that you'll start to work on as well? Because obviously soil might have feathers or other components in it that don't make it vegan.
You're absolutely right. All soil is based on animals. Actually, at one point, they were trying to give people more bang for their buck. So they started adding fertilizers and manure to bagged potting soil. So yeah, there is no vegan bagged potting soil. So yeah, I would love to expand the business past fertilizers to then soils and amendments. For now, people compost, and composting is a really big part of veganic gardening. And they call it veganic. It's just organic and vegan together, veganic. So veganic gardening absolutely leans on composting and bringing that alive soil into the picture. Basically, when you go buy the soil, there's nothing you can do. You can look hard, try to find something that doesn't have animal products. You're going to be hard pressed. The other issue with soil, I like to equate it, how like antiques from the turn of the last century last forever, because those trees were hundreds of thousands of years old. They cut them down, they made a table, it's going to last forever. Our tables today made of the wood today isn't going to last forever. Those trees haven't stood there that long. It's the same with the soil. We used to bag up soil and it was full of nutrients and it was just dense. And that's not the case anymore. The soil doesn't even have time to basically become soil, right? It's like newborn soil, and we put it in a bag and it just doesn't have any nutrients in it. So they have to go in and they have to add it. It's sort of like adding vitamin D to milk, right? You have to make the product more enticing to the consumer. So they go for and they add these fertilizers and stuff to these bags of soil to make them more nutrient dense. But if you want to try to get away from that, definitely composting is the way to go.
On composting, what can people do at home to create their own compost? And one thing I wonder about, especially somebody told me that if you're getting potato peels, any sort of peels that you might have to make your own compost, that it can also attract rats. That obviously in London, we might not want that. So what's your best advice in terms of like the sort of structure to use? Like, is there something that you'd recommend, like a wooden based composting? And also, how do you deter animals getting in and trying to eat that?
Yeah. So if people want to do their own veganic gardening at home, compost, like we said, is one of the most important things they can do if you can. And people get concerned about rats and smell. With the rats, I mean, if here in LA, we have tons of fruit rats, we call them. So planting a fruit tree is a great way to get rats. So, and no one is not planting fruit trees because they're worried about rats. So you have much more of a chance of having rats in your fruit tree than in your compost bin. Most compost bins are covered. And again, if like, I don't know, it's real. I've never had rats be a problem. If you get a mouse or anything, you might have a little possum scurrying under there. I line the outside of mine with gravel. Like I just dig a little bit down and put gravel in there, because if they're going to come in, they're probably going to come in under. I have a slatted wooden bin. I have two, and I've had them for over 10 years. They're just made of redwood. And like I said, they're slatted, so there's some air in between, and you don't have to worry about it. When the compost builds up, it doesn't come through the slats. It's kind of like a solid mass. So I do the layering. So it's just like brown materials, like your leaves, and then my kitchen scraps, and I keep going on up, and I just let mine sit. I have a hot pile. So you just let it sit, it'll fall down. I build it again, if it just compacts. And then eventually I dig that out and I'll just put it in the other bin. And then I start filling up the second one. And then when that one's done, I just move it to a wheelbarrow. And sometimes you need to let it sit for a while. And so it just depends. That's how I do mine. There's a lot of community composting. And that is an amazing thing to get involved with, is community composting. I mean, that is the future. Because also there's a lot of there's restaurants, all kinds of schools. Everyone makes this incredible amount of food waste. So really, communities should be doing it. If you're lucky enough to be able to do it at home, great. But I really think communities need to do it. Apartment buildings, I really think it's going to be the future. I mean, I think everyone knows that, recycling food waste. Another way, other than composting, which isn't available to everybody, is to make your own plant fertilizers. So you can do anything like whipping up a banana peel in your mixer. Aloe, if you have an aloe plant, aloe is an amazing fertilizer. If the plant's good for us, the plant is good for other plants, right? So aloe is a wonderful healing property to us, even internally, right? So if I can take it internally, I know that's going to be perfectly safe to put on my plants. So you can actually whiz an aloe leaf up in your food processor, dilute it with water, and pour it on your plants.
Yeah. How would you know which plant is good for the aloe leaves or the banana skins? Or, it'd be good to know what other ones that would be good.
People like to grind up eggshells. Of course, as a vegan, I don't use eggs, and the eggshells take forever to break down. So, I mean, if people want to do that, they can, but there is no uptake of that calcium of an eggshell in a garden. It would just take years and years. Not worth it. But there's other things, like I said, comfrey, nettles, hedge, clover, vetch, yarrow, even lavender. All of these plants are great for other plants to make as fertilizers. There's something called fermented plant juice, FPJ, and it's about Korean natural farming, KNF, and because they use those acronyms. And if you Google KNF, I mean, there's all these ways to make these fermented plant juices. And what that brings is that life. Because not only do you want to bring nutrients, if you can introduce microbes, very healthy bacteria to your soil, all the better. That is what healthy soil is alive. That's the soil that stores carbon. That's regenerative agriculture. And of course, we can do it with our little pot of marigolds. There's nothing to stop us from having great soil as well. And I think if we understand this as citizens in our own homes, we can make that connection. Then we can tell our politicians and other people, hey, this is how we want to operate from here on out. But it all stays such a secret. So I think experimenting at home, do your Google searches. So there's a fermented plant juice, right? That's a fertilizer. You're going to soak your plants in water and you let it sit and it ferments.
Yeah. One thing that my mum does is actually soaks her banana skins and then gives that to her plants. That's a similar thing, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then the other idea, the big one in regenerative veganic agriculture is green mulches. I don't know if you've ever heard of green mulches or even green manure. It's just the process of planting plants that feed the soil just by the act of them growing in the ground, like fava, like comfrey, nettles. So you're not only is it fixing the soil it's growing in, but then you can use that plant as well to grow other things. And you don't always have to process it in a way that makes like a liquid fertilizer. There's something you just chop it up and you just lay it around your plants like a mulch.
Okay,
so you
right, got it.
grow it in the garden or chop it up and put it around the garden as a mulch.
Yeah, and when you said fava, that's fava beans, is it? The fava bean plant?
Fava
Is
beans,
that right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people are using that to make cheese now. A lot of the new companies are using, instead of like cashew, they can actually use fava beans. Yeah. It's
Can you
quite
imagine?
amazing.
Yes, especially if fava's feeding the soil, where I'm sure a
Yeah.
cat is probably like, taking all the nutrients out of the soil.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah. Have you ever used any of these apps for your phone, which you can actually scan, a plant and it tells you what nutrients or how to fix it if it's unhealthy? Obviously, you probably don't need to, but have you used any of those apps?
No, actually, I have not used those apps. I am the app. I'm on Facebook and I love plant groups and people ask these stupidest questions, but I'm more than happy to answer them because that just shows how far we all have to come. And have had 15 years of research. So of course I know stuff off the top of my head, but I would say the danger of that. And again, just sort of like asking a question on Facebook, they show me this much of their tomato plant and ask what's wrong with it. I want to see the big picture. I have on my website, I call them best practices, and it's the best way. If you set yourself up for success, then you don't have to interfere so much. So looking at a problem on a plant, I want to know what 12 steps you took before you did that, because I can't diagnose that in a vacuum,
Right.
And plus, most of the time, it's nothing. They'll look the leaf on my tomato plant. Your tomato plant hardly even needs leaves, like cut it off and throw it away,
Right.
so
Okay. Yeah.
we're more worried, I think, as a society about fixing problems rather than setting us up for success.
There's completely a science behind it all, isn't there? Because it's also so many things that we don't know how to fix. Like I don't know if you've heard of this plant called a Tulsi plant. Have you heard of that? This is my unhealthy Tulsi plant, which you now know is holy basil.
It's holy basil. Yeah, we call it, Tulsi, like you said.
Yeah. You were just saying you use it for tea.
For tea, yeah, I feel like that's its most common use is tea. It has a cinnamony taste, and like you said, it's very good. Like it's very good for you, for your health. So you just can take the fresh leaves and pour hot water over them, and then strain the leaves. You don't need to dry herbs to make a tea. Same with mint. Same with like lemon balm. You can just put the plants right there. You might want to wash it. You might want to give it a rinse first. It might be dusty from being in your house.
Yeah.
And then I would top it. I would cut it way back.
It's too big, right?
Yeah, it just gets
It gets leggy, is that what we call it? I'm going to move this out of the way for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how much should be cut off?
I would cut off a third at least.
A third from the top, I mean.
At least.
Okay.
Yes. Almost all basils like to be topped.
Right.
Back down.
Right.
And I do that every season. And I would also make sure it's getting enough sunlight because plants get leggy when they're trying to find the sun.
Yeah, so it's definitely by the window by our kitchen.
Good.
It definitely gets a lot of sun, unless it needs to be repotted. I'm not quite sure. I see some other ones that are way more healthier.
You can always look around and see.
Yeah.
I think it needs cut back quite a bit. And it might need fresh soil. Just keep it in the sunlight because we don't keep them indoors. Tulsi is grown outdoors here.
Yeah. I think if it was outdoors in our conditions here, it wouldn't last very long.
Yeah.
Apart from the summer months, I guess.
Yes. Well, I'm going to send you some fertilizer. So
yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for that. In terms of where you're going with your company now, so you've obviously got your range of fertilizers. Soil could come next. What do you think about also those mainstream companies like Miracle Grow, for example? Scott's huge company, sell lots of soils with those fertilizers inbuilt. Are they doing anything around veganic farming? Obviously, they might have organic products. But what's your opinion about their range and what can these bigger companies also do?
Yeah, I mean, would we even call Scott's a company? It's like a conglomerate, like a continent.
Yes.
They used to do the Miracle Grow, where they still do the blue powder, right? Infamous blue powder. I used it in my childhood. And then they moved to organics. And so now Miracle Grow Organics is just as big, if not the biggest organic company, because these fertilizer companies, no offense, don't really care. If you want blue powder, we'll give you blue powder. That was very 70s and 80s. If you want organics made out of animals, we'll give you that as well. It doesn't really matter because animal materials are cheap on the back end. Now, we know, of course, the cost. You can't just be like, oh, the cost of this animal to fertilizer hit the renderer. No, it goes the whole way back. The cost of that animal is huge. But to Miracle Grow, getting those resources isn't very expensive, and they are nutrient dense. So I don't think for a company like that, it matters one way or the other. They're going to follow the blowing trend and provide whatever the heck the consumer wants, as long as it's cheap and effective. And so now we're faced with this new dilemma where, of course, we're going to have to ramp up. There's going to be increased costs. I mean, that's just how it is. So, you know, I think that would be.
And by the way, you're doing everything yourself, manufacturing wise, right? You do it.
Yeah.
You need funds to help you scale your business, I guess, going forward now to get to the same levels.
So one of the biggest challenges I'm facing is that fertilizer is heavily regulated, like we were saying. So it has to be licensed and certified. That level it's just extremely difficult, challenging. I'll totally do it, but it starts off with the sources. So those inputs I talked about, the individual inputs, all of those inputs have to have their own organic certification. Then my blend of inputs has its own certification, and that's for every single product. And I have to do that in every single state in the country because our fertilizers are regulated state to state. So I have been trying for 3 years to get my license here in California, my fertilizer's license, and they just won't do it. But the Department of Agriculture is who gives those licenses out. So, you know, I always say like the Department of Agriculture, it's what it's called, but it's just like, it's really the Department of Animal Agriculture. There is no department of plant, you know, it just doesn't exist. So they just don't really recognize me. I started my company years ago. It was called something else. I was sued, even though I got the trademark and everything. I was sued by a pesticide company. This will be a whole other discussion we can have sometime, because part of what these industries do is they take words out of the lexicon by trademarking them. And even though they don't use them, they're supposed to use them if they have the trademark. But even though they don't use them, no one else can use them. It's crazy. So they wouldn't let me call my fertilizer company this word because they had the trademark to it. Even though the government was like, you guys don't infringe on each other. They said no. I wasn't going to fight them about it. So I had to change everything in my company. So I already had the website, everything was ready to go. But the website wasn't turned on because I'm not licensed. While I was doing this launch, because I basically launched this line in November, we had the website on for a few days just to move shit around. And someone placed an order and I was like, impossible. Who would place an order? And it turned out to be the Department of Agriculture.
They just wanted to get some insights.
I think they were trying to entrap me. I think they were trying to catch me selling illegally.
Oh, I see. Right. Wow.
So that means they were surveilling the site because it was open for 3 days. It's no advertising or anything. It's that's a lot of effort to go to, you know, for someone you haven't even licensed. And there are so many fertilizers out there that either don't have licenses or don't do the proper labels, you know, that basically are out of aren't doing what they should do. And they totally get away with it. It's not a problem. But I can't even get this little fertilizer off the ground. So now we have a lawyer who's willing to work with us side by side, because before I was just doing it myself. And now we're raising the funds to recertify, because it's an expensive process. It's a long process. Everything has to be done with perfection, which is what I want anyway. So, and I want to go back from the beginning, look at all the inputs and make sure they're all right, because I lab test all the individual inputs, because these companies will send you a fertilizer input and tell you the NPK is, and then when I test it, doesn't come back like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so of course, for my fertilizer, I have to make sure the inputs, so then I have to make that adjustment in my spreadsheet. Well, they say it's a 14, but I know it's a 7. Just in terms of how much I add. So it's just a time-consuming process. So we are raising funds right now to resubmit the license and our fertilizer.
Right. And what are you looking to raise, and at what valuation are you thinking?
Yeah. So right now what I'm doing, because this is like, I'm just totally out of my wheelhouse now. And I always want to say to people, I was like a theater geek. You know, I was not a chemist. I wasn't a biologist. I couldn't do maths. And I I think when you're young, you get pigeonholed, like they literally put you in tracks, like you're this, you're that, and you can't be two things at once. And I just think everyone should like clear the deck. You can be anything, you can teach yourself anything. So this business thing is like one of the last vestiges. So the way I'm doing it is just these loans. It's just the easiest way to do it. I'm looking to raise 250,000. It's not that much, but 250K would get me past this hurdle. And then it would last like for about a year. Right. There's a name for that too. How long that lasts, the money lasts. You're the plant CEO.
As in runway, you mean?
Yes, right.
Your
exactly.
Runway. Yeah.
Yes, your runway. Yeah. On that money, you'll go this far, right?
Yeah.
Time-wise. Yeah. And so we're looking to raise 250K, get us through this certification. What was your other question?
Evaluation. So what you think, like, so if you're raising safe notes, for example, what valuation would that be?
Yeah. So our idea is that in 2 years, we're going to value the company. So the loan will convert in 2 years to stock based on the valuation 2 years from now, since right now there's not much to value.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so early stage on that pre-valuation money, I guess.
Exactly. Yes. Is that pre-seed?
Yeah, I mean, have you raised anything yet?
Yes.
So then it depends on what your seed amount was, whether that you're classing that as friends and family, for example, helping you start up.
So we have like 5 independent investors already, so that's good.
Nice. Yeah, good. What can the average person do now? What you're saying is go to the supermarket. You've got 2 choices of vegetables, right? Let's take tomatoes. One set of tomatoes is not organic, but it was used with chemical fertilizer. The other one is organic, but then it could be grown in animals. So what are we meant to eat at a supermarket?
I know. I would still pick organic. I think obviously growing your own, and that's the other, my other passion is, growing your own plants. You can just start with one plant. I mean, it's very easy because there's bigger problems other than what I'm talking about, right? We got a whole centralized food system that's very dangerous, very at risk.
Totally. Yeah.
Busting that out and growing your own plants, you're already doing a little disruption. So that's great.
Yeah.
Your own plants.
And I really like what you say, by the way, before about the community garden projects, the community composting. But there'll be also people who may not have that as a accessible means or may not have a garden, but I guess they can start by doing some house plants with just, experimenting at home. But what can they do? I mean, obviously you're saying to buy organic is still better than the non-organic. And what's your key reason there? Is it really just to do with the types of chemicals that they're using and the other plants are just going to be creating more nutrient density in terms of the actual products?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I do think organic overall is more nutrient dense. And of course, they are at least saying certain chemicals can't go on those. There are certain cancer causing chemicals that can't be put on organic vegetables. So there is a line there, that we don't want to cross. Yeah.
What are the cancer causing chemicals that could be in non-organic food?
Right. So it's all the weed killers and the insecticides and the other fungicides. All of those sides are, potentially poisonous, quite frankly.
Out of those groups, are there some that are worse than others that may cause cancer at a high degree, like between the fungi or the weed killer, for example, pesticides, between those 3, which ones, or are they all just bad?
I think they're all pretty bad. And automatically I'm already wanting to say, but the animal stuff's really bad too. I automatically am like, what's worse than antibiotic resistant pathogens? Because, again, if you eat these organic products, and I mean, that's why there's the salmonella scares. That's why there's E. coli scares. Plants don't get salmonella. That is from animal products being put on plants.
Right.
It's beyond.
And there was these outbreaks, wasn't there?
Yes.
But they found it was E. coli that was sprayed onto spinach, for example.
Yeah. Or just next to it. It's just, there's like wastewater
proximity, right there. And it could be the air.
It could be the trucks. Yeah, it could be anything.
And all those waste lot from pig farming, for example, going into the atmosphere, causing that devastation.
Yeah. And they were saying, so they give them antibiotics. So the cattle and all the animals now just get antibiotics, period. Doesn't matter if they're sick. It's what they do. They actually have found that antibiotics are a form of growth support. And so they just willy-nilly, everyone gets a shot of antibiotics. But now they're fine. Then, of course, these pathogens, our bacteria becomes antibiotic resistant. So if you eat those pathogens, they can live in your gut and they can kill the healthy bacteria in your gut. Or when it does become time for you to have to take an antibiotic, too late. Those antibiotic resistant pathogens are already in there. I
Yeah,
mean, this
that's
is,
crazy. Yeah.
yeah.
I
And it's
mean,
just like, when is
yeah,
going to sound the alarm, on
yeah.
this?
Have you spoken to anybody similar like you in different countries that are trying to do the same thing?
Yes, Cleve West in the UK and Jimmy Vidal in Canada. There's a good number of people who are doing it. And again, they call it veganics. It's much bigger in the UK and Canada than it is in the United States. So yeah, I love talking to them, and they've all been really big supports, actually.
Perhaps you should all get together and sort of maybe create some sort of a global organization or alliance or something where you can share best practice in your markets, right, to help the
Yeah.
movement grow.
Yeah, there is a certification in Canada. It's called the North American Veganic Certification. And I've received that. I'm the only fertilizer company to ever receive it in all of North America. So,
Congrats.
yeah, thanks. That's really exciting. So, Jimmy Vidal is the guy who runs that, and he's extremely well known. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
I think a global alliance of veganic gardeners is definitely needed.
Yeah. And where do you see, I guess, future innovations for veganic farming going?
That's really exciting. I mean, you can restore land while feeding people. I mean, like that's what is exciting. Because I mean, who doesn't go on the dismal spiral? The news isn't great. So I really feel good about the idea of veganic farming because, it's not just about the soil, it brings in the wildlife. It's about kind of like rewilding agricultural areas. Of course we have this, we all know the bad parts of factory farming, the way they decimate the landscape. It's just these empty fields and carbons releasing out of the soil, and there's no hedgerows, like there used to be where there's wildlife because they couldn't get their tractors through it. Well, now they realize those hedgerows are a good idea. There's all kinds of wildlife that needs to subsist. It's a whole ecosystem that we don't even understand. So returning these ecosystems is like stage one. And I'm really excited about that. I think that's going to be great for everything.
Yeah. And talking about the devastation, we know what's happening in the Amazon rainforest with the rainforest being cut down to grow soya, not necessarily to give to humans, but to give to the demand in meat and to feed those animals. So that's a major issue, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I guess they also a lot of palms, right? There's like a lot of oil, I think, too, grown in that way. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, just to destroy ecosystems, it's a horrible thing. The other problem is, with these meals, like not only do they feed them corn and soy, these livestock animals, they feed them other animals. So the same things that
Yeah,
go into fertilizer, they feed
that's
right
right.
back to the animal. And
Yeah,
that's
I've
how the
heard.
thing got started. And
Yeah, I've heard that started to happen now. One thing for sure is that we need more people like you on the planet to help this cause. So obviously, organic farming is so important. It helps restore natural soil, especially if you're using those crops like the nettles that you said and the fava beans.
yeah.
But also we want to try and grow stuff ourselves and create our own compost. And if you're using fertilizers and support vegan companies like yourself. So yeah, just want to say thank you for doing what you're doing. And I hope this message goes out more and people start getting used to buying these products, but also experimenting at home.
Yeah, and joining with your communities. Get a little community gardening going. That's a really great thing for everything. And for the kids too. I tried to like design my label to look really different than like a traditional, like not a flowery, basically not a fertilizer marketed to me, white suburban women. So because I want to attract the next generation, the millennials. I mean, and I think we're one of the first places in history where older generations understand that the younger generation actually might be smarter. Like they are smarter, they're more open. I don't know, they're more in touch with themselves, they're more independent. And I know they're the ones, obviously, that are going to have to carry this through. So I was really trying to make my company something accessible that's non-gendered. It can be urban. This farming can be anywhere. And that's how we're going to have to move forward in the future, not just like turning a blind eye to where our food comes from anymore, but really engaging in it.
Yeah. And I guess also if there's any people who live near you and you need a, landscape gardener, that's the other thing that you also do, right?
Yeah, I'm doing consulting now. The landscaping was very labor and time intensive. And
Right.
so in November, I was like, okay, I'm going to let go of my gardens and I'm going to focus on the fertilizer company. So now I do consulting. And then, of course, my investors still get their gardens taken care of. So yeah, anyone needs to talk, I'm on those Facebook groups.
Perfect. So we'll leave your contact details and where they can find you in the description. But just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show, Erin.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So I appreciate you for getting these words out. I mean, podcasts and all this stuff, people love this stuff. This is a great way to spread information. So I thank you very much for what you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome. And yeah, thanks again for coming on, and speak to you again soon.
Okay, thanks.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.